Hello from Kyiv, capital of Ukraine. We have been settled here for a year now, and it's the longest period of time without traveling for us. Well, this time allowed us to focus on work, reorganize our routine, and create more art. That's how we decided to go out on field trips to sketch outdoors more often. Since Kyiv is dazzling with amazing coffee shops, it looked like a great starting point. And us, well, we can't spend a day without drinking at least 2 cups of coffee. So here I am, sketching my breakfast in a coffee shop. I have been painting with watercolor for many years, but I like to do it my way. Settled in a studio, with my big table, with a nice reference photo, some music on the background, or maybe even a TV show. Sketching still life is not exactly my jam, even though I have a strong opinion that it is the best way to train your eye, see volumes and shadows, and it is the most efficient way to learn to paint. It's just, I love my cozy studio. So, these sketching sessions in coffee shops are actually bringing up two challenges for me. Get a habit of painting still life, relying on my eyes instead of the fixed stability of a photo reference, and relax to paint loose. Generally, I paint in realistic style and often catch myself diving into details and trying to portray every tiny single thing on my painting. Not that it's bad, but painting loose gives more freedom to observers, allows them to fantasize and finish the image in their mind. Well, and loose art is just more playful, airy, and ultimately watercolory. So I hope this challenge will give me some nice results. Today I decided to paint a cappuccino and a croissant. Quick pencil sketch helped locate those on paper and define the composition. No details here, I just marked what and where will be. The paint I'm using is a travel size Winsor and Newton set. It's a pretty old and used one, and to be honest, I haven't been using it for years. I kind of left it at home in one of my trips and ended up traveling for years with a completely different set of paints. So now it's back, cleared of dust, and it actually reminded me why I loved it. The colors are so translucent and pretty unique. With intention to paint loose and freely, I started with some wet techniques. I gave myself a word to not stress out with all the unexpected leaks and splashes, which are definitely coming with all this loose approach, and not to worry about the disproportions, shaky lines. After all, it's a pretty small sketchbook, a pretty quick painting, and easygoing morning. Speaking of which, for this coffee shop sketching sessions, I picked up a watercolor sketchbook by Rosa. It's a local Ukrainian brand that produces a variety of art materials, including the very first Ukrainian professional watercolor paint. as well as watercolor paper, easels, different type of other paints like oil and acrylic. It's pretty great. So the cotton content in this sketchbook is 25%, and I can definitely feel it. This is the first time I'm painting in this sketchbook, and as the feel of this paper came by surprise. As I was trying to navigate the paint, I also was figuring out the paper personality. Trust me, it does have a personality. I love the color of that cup. Even though my Winsor & Newton set was missing a ton of colors, well, it's quite old, as I said earlier, lots of the paints were completely used, and I didn't really have much of a choice in terms of color. I think I've got just the perfect combo to get that mint tone on the coffee cup. Finding the right colors is always a fun part. Is it brown too dark? Is this brown leaning too much towards red? Is it more like a orange with blue? Is it accurate or more symbolic? Trying to stop myself from geeking out on the bubbles on the surface of coffee, the details of the flower, the art on the coffee, I kept my attention on shadows and lights. That's what makes the image look real and three-dimensional. I love to do my sketches rather as doodles with a thin pen outline first. However, for this challenge, I decided to stick to raw watercoloring. My focus is on colors and volumes and on how the painting feels like. Oh, and now I even enjoy all those spots where fresh painting is leaking into another layer. Painting wet on wet means constantly adjusting the tone. As the paper dries out, it loses the intensity and the color really reveals itself. So you have to adjust the tone, add more depth, intensify the color as you go, and pretty much every time it comes as a surprise, especially if you're working on the paper for the first time. Pursuing loose approach to the painting, I decided to try something new. Unfinished story, disappearance into a background. I shadowed the space behind the cup, leaving it unclear and airy. At the same time, bringing attention to the cup and maybe to the art in it. I think for today's sketch, I want to stick to this idea of an unfinished painting. Sometimes even the most chaotic results must be planned ahead. Winsor Newton watercolors are very translucent and light, so sometimes it takes a while to gain this depth of the tone. So I have to apply and reapply and reapply the paint to reach the darkness that I need. The next impressionistic touch is the plate. Mix of blue and purple just feels better here than the actual color of the plate, as well as some drops and splashes for playful look. I didn't bother with the accuracy of the plate. The oval is clearly not an oval, but I bothered with the shadows to show the curviness of that plate, to show the cast shadow of that croissant. This game of light and shadow was the main goal that I was going after in this painting. I wanted to show the contrast between light and shadow, and that's what I'm doing. I've been painting around the croissant, which is known as a negative space technique. It allowed me to preserve that space for a lighter tone of a croissant. If that purple color leaked into the space, I wouldn't be able to fix that at all. And often with negative space technique, the subject tends to feel cut out. So it is important to integrate it naturally. Adjust the lines, correct the borders, make it fit naturally. The paper wasn't exactly at my mercy today, and I had to adjust. It didn't absorb much of water because of the low cotton content, and also showed quite noticeable texture. Oh well, this paper clearly doesn't like my idea with all the watery and loose paintings. But I'll keep going. I will get my way around it. I carefully painted the croissant with the same color palette that I used for a coffee, so that I'm staying in this relatively limited color palette. And I'm trying to be really careful not to touch any of the borders, the purple borders, to avoid it leaking into my croissant. Dropping darker tones right away into the wet layer also gives me an opportunity to get some soft color transitions. I love the vibrancy of Winsor & Newton, but the color disappears pretty fast after the paper gets dry. Then the tones become rather muted. So here come new layers and fresh shadows. I'm defining tones in a cup, in a coffee, and just making them stand out more. I also have to separate that cup from a saucer and place some vibrant highlights with concentrated paint to get that cup looking alive. Working over already dried layer is always a tricky part, but I think I managed. Nothing a few splashes can't fix. There's truly a thin line between defining the light and shadow to create volume in the subject you paint and uh, coloring coloring in as if you're coloring a coloring book. And yes, I said coloring like 10 times. The croissant also needed some texture, so darker tones are coming into the picture. The paper doesn't really have an outstanding grain. That's why even dry strokes look pretty soft, which I think is fine considering the general feel of this sketch. I think the dry lines would actually stand out more and not look very organic in this composition. It has been a fun first sketching session here in Idealist coffee shop. From the start, I was puzzled with two things: the unexpected behavior of new paper and forgotten behavior of an old paint plus limited color choice. But I think it turned out fine, and I got the chance to eat the croissant too. Idealist is one of our favorite coffee shops in the center of Kyiv. They serve great coffee, offer selection of alternative drinks, sell their own roasted beans for coffee time at home, and offer food. Bunch of people love to work from here with their laptops, as often we do as well. It's also quite popular among foreigners. Idealist, we will be back as usual. Until then, we're up for the next watercolor sketching session.